Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with episode number 104, I believe, or 106, or 125, who cares? Good times with Rabbi Tovia Singer. Rabbi, welcome back to the show, sir. It's a pleasure, as always. How are you, sir?
Yes, it is. Very good. I'm in the holiest land.
You sure are. You sure are. And you're a very holy man in a holy land, so that's good.
It's a good shidduch. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, it's been a while. It's good to be back in the studio with you. I know the viewers out there are hoping that we will kick this phone line open so they can start calling in. Give me a second here. I thought I had this set up. So I guess it's been about 4 weeks now. 4 weeks off for both of us, really, for all of us. So what's been occupying your time for the past 4 weeks or so?
I've been wondering, why is it taking 4 weeks? Why is it taking so long? What's taking this guy so long to get back? What's been going on? I had the opportunity to do a wedding in Australia. I was in the U.S. on my grandson's birth and bris, and I'm in Jerusalem right now, launching a tour of the Holy Land. So I'm very excited about that. I mean, nice. That's amazing, and getting to see my grandchildren here in the Holy Land, that's very, very special. It's like this place really spins at a very high level, and very, very intense. To imagine reading scripture and then walking where the prophets preached. Mm-hmm. That's very, very exciting.
Yeah, it's very intense for sure. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, I know it's been, for sure, it's been busy on my end. What's taken me so long is we've had, fell a little bit behind in work, and so I had to play a little catch-up. Had a couple jobs that literally had me sleeping away from home for 3 or 4 days at a time. Mm. And it was very, very tiring, but that job has officially been closed, and I'm hoping that this week will begin our every other week cycle again. So for a while. And some more good news, Rabbi,
yes.
And to the viewers out there, at least it's the beginning of some really cool news, is my wife and I...
You're pregnant?
Now, how did you know? Am I showing really? Is it that noticeable? I mean,
a little bit. I didn't want to say, but it was a bit told.
Yeah, I'm expecting actually a building. We actually went and picked out a building for the studio. I was going to try to build it, which I could do, but if you calculate all the lost time from work that I'd be taking off to actually build this building, whatever it be, 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, that lost income plus the amount of money that I would pay for that, it's almost close enough to justify saying, the heck with that, we'll buy a building. You pay payments on it. It's like it's sad though, because you buy a $10,000 building and it winds up costing you $22,000 if you pay it out. But hey, you know what? The payments are low enough where they're manageable, and donations are just enough to probably pay for that on the internet. So we're going to go that route. I'm going to start working on it as soon as it gets here in about 3 or 4 weeks. Start putting wiring and electrical and insulation and sheetrock and all this other stuff, and hopefully we'll be in the studio within the next 3 to 6 months. That'd be nice. We'll see.
Brilliant.
So Hashem willing. So the ball is officially rolling. So Baruch Hashem. Okay. Yep. You know what? I said let me log in, and I actually didn't do that. Let me see. I'll do that right now. So yeah, there's been a lot of. I saw a video you would just love to see. It was a mechanical voice, I guess, to kind of cover the identity of the person recording it. But it was a video recording of the false rabbi, and it had you on there. I couldn't get past the first 60 seconds. They're basically saying all these claims you're making about Christianity and stuff is all false. It's all made up from you and all these other people. And so I had to humor it, so I clicked on it, and I couldn't get past the very first thing they said, and I was like, these people really do not read their Bible at all, because otherwise, if they did, they wouldn't. That video would have never made it to start with. So I just thought it was kind of funny. A lot of other people had some pretty interesting educational comments toward the video producer that I thought was kind of entertaining. So okay, here we go. Shut up, William. I got to get this typed in here. Can't multitask too well, I guess. Let's see if that does it right there. And we are officially signed in. Phone lines are open, and I hope they come to the right channel. That would be nice if they do. And 855-952-4253. If you're on the go, that's 855-95 Bible. So write that down or remember it, so that way when you're visiting Hawaii and you're drinking your margarita on the beach and you want to tune in to Tanakh Talk, you just remember the number 855-95 Bible. So, all right, Rev, I'm going to pull up a question, unless the phone rings. If the phone rings during this question, then I will actually divert to the actual caller, and then we'll pick back up on this question a little bit later. There's actually several of them here. Let me just get the right screen up here. Oh, I'll close it out. I've got to pull it up on my Facebook questions. One moment. By the way, people, if you want to send a question in, actually, there we go. That's our relief right there. So let's catch this. But if you want to send a question in, if you're going to email a question, you can do that. But the chances of us getting to it are like 1 in like probably 10,000. Not really so bad, but it's pretty hard. So if you really want to guarantee to get your question answered, you need to call in just like our caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Shalom Aleichem, William and Rabbi.
Aleichem Shalom.
Show. And I'm calling Jacob from New York.
And, very good.
Good. But you guys are aware, I've noticed there's a lot of these people calling themselves Karaites on YouTube, and I guess maybe they're like kind of self-proclaimed. I'm not really sure. It's like a new movement that seems. At first, I was kind of negative towards some of these people, but now I'm starting to realize maybe I was wrong. They're not doing avodah zarah, worshiping idols or anything, and they're a little confused, but they're kind of on the right track with certain things, but they kind of go off on anti-Mishnah, anti-Gemara, Talmud, shtick they do. But they're kind of like Ben Noach in a sense, but I guess they reject everything the rabbis say. That's they go into that. Are you guys aware of that? It's like seems like it's getting popular now. I think it's a good thing.
So you're saying that that being a Karaite is becoming more popular? Is that what you're saying?
It seems that way. It seems like a lot of people proclaiming themselves as Karaites.
Right.
They're not really aware of the history and, how the Rambam considers them Zadukim, Sadducees. They're kind of heretical, but in a sense, they're kind of getting their foot in the door in the right direction. Not Messianics. They're trying to read the Tanakh in their way. And I'm trying to be nice to them now and show them information rather than be negative to them now. And I don't want to, be rude or condescending to any of them. And it seems like maybe it's a sign of Mashiach, like they're, rejecting the New Testament, of course, and reading Tanakh. I mean, what's your guys' take on that? I'll hang up and listen to it because I'm on a cell phone.
Oh, sure, no problem at all. Hey, that sounds great. Thanks for the question.
Excellent show and good luck. Hey, William.
Yes.
We built a small, we're contractors here, and we built a small, really nice office out of a sea container. Believe it or not, it sounds crazy, but a 40-footer, very secure, and we wired it with lights and put walls inside, and it became like a little office that's secure, and it might be an affordable way to build a cool studio for a minimal amount of money if you look into it.
That's really cool. If we're on Facebook, you should send me some pictures. I'd like to see that. Now, I say fortunately, unfortunately. It's actually fortunate. We've actually already got the building secure, and it's going to be delivered here in about 3.5 weeks. So we're moving forward with that. But I would love to see what you've done with the sea container. I love seeing stuff like this. Yeah. Send me some pictures.
Well, we do work like in Brooklyn and other areas where you have to really be seriously secure, lock your stuff. It's like steel.
Right,
you can sawzall windows and they're watertight, and you can move them.
Hey, I like it.
And I know you guys hopefully you didn't get hit by that flood down there, God forbid. But,
yeah, no, we're good.
But anyway, I'll hang up on what. Yeah.
Okay, brother.
Thank
you.
Guys.
Thank you. I'm gonna. Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Shalom. Hey, Rabbi, just real funny, really interesting thought. Not funny, not disrespectful, but something I'm curious along with him. It's my question is it better to be someone who's atheist, or is it better to be a Karaite? And I say that because I know kind of what part of the answer is going to be, but I wonder that because some people really do disrespect Karaites like completely and show them no respect. And I'm thinking, so anyway, just take that and shape that however you will, and take your time, have fun with it.
Yeah, so let me think here. The Karaite movement, there's no way to do a thing where is one worse or better than another. you can't mix apples and oranges. The Karaite movement began essentially in the early Middle Ages by a man named Anan ben David, and it began with like anything, with a political fight, disagreement over who should be the Reish Galusa. And the Reish Galusa means who should be the exilarch. And you're going, well, what is that? Well, as it turns out, after the temple was destroyed, there was still a Babylonian leadership. There was still a Jewish leadership among the children of Israel, of those who are descended from the house of David. And there was a disagreement of who should head that. And when the question of who should be the next person in charge was put to the test, the person who thought he should be the next person that was not assigned that sparked a schism among the children of Israel that began essentially in Babylon in the period called the Gaonim. And the period of the Gaonim is a period that's after the Talmud was complete in the 6th century and before the period of the Rishonim, and let's say the 10th century, late 9th century, early 10th century. Now, I'm not a spokesperson for the Karaites, but the Karaites, the authentic, when I say authentic, it means people who sort of trace themselves back to that movement, assert that there is no oral interpretation of the Torah, there's no oral law, and that all there is to the Torah is what is written, or the Jewish scriptures. Traditional Judaism, they would call us for Rabbinite or Rabbinic Judaism. Christians would call me, because I'm an Orthodox Jew, that. It's probably not meant as a flattering statement, but we'd call it traditional Judaism. The Torah was given to Moses, of blessed memory, and it was accompanied by an oral tradition. And you go, well, what does that mean? So, for example, the Torah says, the Torah gives us headlines. Torah indicates that you can't kill an animal in any way you please, but rather, Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 21 conveys that you must slaughter the animal in the manner that I have shown you. Well, as it turns out, if you take a Tanakh and you shake it all you want, you'll find nowhere where this information is conveyed in how you're supposed to slaughter an animal. So we have the headline in the written Torah, and the oral Torah gives us the details of how it's supposed to be done. It's through a process of shechita. There is all kinds of laws of how an animal is properly slaughtered. How do you remove the blood? The Torah says you're not allowed to consume blood. What does that mean? What is the proper way to take out blood? You can't take out every drop of blood. That's not possible. So you have to take out enough blood where you're allowed to consume it. How do you do that? The Torah says you're not allowed to eat fat. What fat is it referring to? It certainly can't mean all kinds of fat. So the Torah gives us the headlines, but the oral Torah tells us how to apply this. In Leviticus chapter 16, we are told, and other places, that on, let's say, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the day, the Sabbath of Sabbath, Shabbos Shabbosim, that it says you should afflict your soul. And incidentally, the Torah says if you don't afflict your soul on Yom Kippur, then a person will be cut off. It's spiritually a capital offense. Now, the question obviously has to be raised is how exactly do you afflict your soul? So, as it turns out, the Torah never says, there is nowhere where the Torah indicates how you should do this. Now, it is inconceivable. One may say, if someone denies the oral Torah, like the Sadducees, some people assign the Sadducee movement, really called the Tzedukim, also sparked by a personal political vendetta. It's always this politics of who's going to be the head, and it's this personal vendetta that sparks these schisms. So it says it nowhere in the Torah of how you should do this. You can't claim that it's up to you to think about what you think. It's some subjective way of afflicting your soul, because the Torah says that the penalty for not afflicting your soul is to be cut off from your nation. It's essentially a spiritual capital offense that therefore can't be subjective, because if it's subjective, then no one can be accountable. A person could say, that's not what I thought was afflicting my soul. I mean, does afflicting yourself mean that maybe you should do what Shia Muslims do on Ashura, where they whip themselves and scourge themselves? What does it mean? The Torah tells us on the Sabbath day you cannot do any kind of work. That's a capital offense if you violate Shabbos. The Torah really gives us almost no information on what does malacha. This is a very unique Hebrew word. What does that entail? What is work? Because if you ask a physicist what work is, so you could just pick up a fork and knife, and that does require work. But as it turns out, that's not a violation of Shabbos. But what is work? You could pick up a chair on your back and carry it around your house. Well, that's a lot of work, but it's actually no violation of Shabbos. So there has to be some objective standard of what this work entails. And as it turns out, there are 39 categories of work. We are told, what I'm conveying to you is, so that the Karaite movement denies that there was any oral information conveyed to the children of Israel through Moses of blessed memory, our great teacher. But if in fact that is the case, the problems are so monumental that it becomes impossible to keep the Torah. Christians don't understand this, and former Christians don't get this, because if you never try to keep the Torah, then you'll go, well, you don't need an oral law, it's all there. That's because you never tried to. In fact, the Karaites had to put together their own tradition, because it became impossible for Karaites to actually carry out the Torah. Karaites are certainly not Christians by any means. Karaite comes from the word kra, which means scripture alone. Rejecting the oral Torah from the Karaites' position is very important, because it means denying the authority of the sages who convey the oral Torah. So there is often, when there are schisms, when there's a personal vendetta against the leaders of the Jewish people, we'll call them rabbis. It's not a biblical term, Tanakh term, but we'll use it because it's conventional. If you want to say that I'm against the leaders of the Jewish people because I hate their guts, the one thing you'd want to say is God would never endow them to orally convey over spiritual, eternal oracles. But what the Karaites would have to do is, for instance, what do? Well, traditional Karaites, meaning people who trace themselves back to Babylonian Jews or Jews from Egypt or Turkey, have their own method of slaughtering an animal. And in fact, a traditional Karaite, not those who are like website Karaites, I'm talking about Karaites who they actually have their own method of slaughtering an animal. It's similar to a traditional Jewish method, but in fact, a traditional Karaite would not eat kosher food slaughtered by me, because they have their own method. So they had to develop their own oral law, and they would refer to it as a tradition. The Karaites run into monumental problems. How the Torah tells us clearly that there are certain peoples that cannot convert to Judaism, cannot join the children of Israel, namely Moabites, for example. A Moabite can never join the Jewish people. Now, we don't know who the Moabites are today. I'm not going to go into the history of why there was a mass world homogenization, but we'll assign it to the Assyrian Empire some 2,700 years ago, their policy of conquering nations and then transferring populations. That's how the 10 tribes got lost. That's how the Samaritans entered Israel. But the key point is that at the time previous to Isaiah, you had the northern kingdom. So as it turns out, the Torah says you could not a Moabite could not join the congregation of Israel. Well, Ruth, as it turns out, the great-grandmother of King David, was a Moabite. So how was she able to join the children of Israel? And not only was she able to convert to Judaism, but she was the great-grandmother of the single most popular individual in Tanakh, and that's David. And you're going, how do I come to say David is the most popular? Well, as it turns out, if I ask you a trivia question, whose name appears more frequently in the Jewish scriptures than any other, you might say Moses. Moses' name appears throughout Tanakh 770 times. I'm sure some Lubavitchers just got excited. But as it turns out, David's name appears well over 1,000 times in Tanakh, more than any other. And he is the great-grandfather of the Mashiach. He is the one with whom God made a covenant in 2 Samuel chapter 7. Through him would come all the Davidic kings until the Mashiach himself, until the Messiah himself. Well, how could David even be a Jew? His grandmother was from a lineage that's condemned. Now, without the law of Torah, you're done. You're fried. So that's the schism. That's essentially a schism. You'd have to go to a character to present the other side, but I have a whole chapter in volume 1 on the oral Torah. You couldn't even read the Torah without the nakudot, the vowels, because the Hebrew language is a consonantal language, and meaning the original Hebrew did not have vowels. We see now vowels in many printed works, but those vowels were created in what are called the nakudot in the early Middle Ages. Without them, you couldn't even read the text. I couldn't go on and on and on at this point. Moreover, you see that the prophets made open references to what is the oral tradition. Jeremiah speaks about the prohibition of carrying in and out of your house in Jeremiah chapter 19. In Nehemiah, in the book of Nehemiah, Jews had come to the land of Israel. A little context, and they were not the most religious Jews when they came to build the second temple. Some 42,000 Jews come from Babylon at the command of Cyrus, and later reaffirmed by Darius II, the Persian. And they're largely not very religious Jews. And they're failing to keep laws like buying and selling on the Sabbath and so on, and you'll find this in Nehemiah chapter 10, chapter 13, and the question is, what is the basis of that prohibition of not buying and selling on Shabbos? So you find Daniel praying 3 times a day, and he risked his life, read Daniel 6, to pray 3 times. That's oral law, that's not written law. So therefore, the written Torah is pregnant with oral Torah. I want to make a point about ex-Christians. I don't think I'm going to offend anyone. Ex-Christians have I retract that. Frequently, people who are ex-Christians are troubled by an oral tradition. It bothers them. It's something I don't think I've ever said live on air. But people who were evangelical Christians and then leave it and embrace the Jewish faith as Noachide or considering converting to Judaism often are repelled by the oral tradition because they were raised as Christians. They were told by their pastors, by men, what to believe and what is God. And they found the whole thing was untrue. That at some point in their adult life, they realized that there were astounding problems with what they were being taught. So to ex-Christians, there can be an aversion to anything outside of Scripture. And therefore, this idea that the original authentic Judaism is a written law without an oral law could be very, very appealing to the ex-Christian. For one reason is because there's a trust issue. How do I trust rabbis again? And that's why you have to go back into the text. And I dedicate a lot of time to this. But ex-Christians really sometimes struggle with this, but they're going, I don't see this in the text, and I'm really tired of trusting people, because I trusted people for 40 years of my life, and I found out the whole thing was a lie, and now I just want to see what the Bible says. And that's why when I respond to this point about the oral Torah, I always make reference to what is in the written Torah, that is explicit, not only that the written Torah conveys commandments that presume that you know what the Torah is making a reference to. When it says, don't do any work on the Sabbath, or afflict yourself, just to give you an example. Or phylacteries, what does that look like? And we discovered phylacteries in Cave 4 of the Qumran Caves that date back 2,200 years. 24 phylacteries were discovered, and they are identical to the ones that we use today. And that means that the Jews never made this stuff up. That means if we go to the discoveries that were made in Qumran beginning in 1947 and subsequently in what we find is that everything we dig up is the oral law is everywhere. It's everywhere in the Christian Bible. I'm not going to go into it now, but I have a chapter on this in my book as well. It means that everything we're seeing, whether we look at Tanakh, the oral Torah is kept throughout, is discussed throughout. Even rabbinic traditions such as fasts. A fast, let's take fast. You find it in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 15. Where does it talk about fasting in the 5 books of Moses? But we're told in Zechariah chapter 8 that in the Messianic age, the fast days, including Yom Kippur, which will be the fast of the 7th month, will be turned into days of joy. What is Zechariah presupposing? That you understand. Zechariah is presupposing that you know there's a fast on Yom Kippur. Well, where is that in the 5 books of Moses? And you see the exact same thing in Isaiah 58. I'll never forget this. I was speaking to a Christian, not a Karaite, a Christian missionary, and he said, well, the reason we fast on Yom Kippur is nothing to do with the oral Torah. It's in the written. It says it openly in the book of Isaiah, chapter 58. There's a reference there that on the Sabbath of Sabbaths, that this is a reference to the Jews fasting. Huh? Now, in the context in Isaiah 58 is that Isaiah is being called to make his voice like a trumpet, to criticize the children of Israel, because they were keeping these fasts, they were doing these things, but there wasn't the social justice, the balance wasn't there. But so Isaiah makes reference to fasting on Yom Kippur. So this Christian said to me, there's our source for it. So I asked him, tell me something. Isaiah lived roughly 600 years after the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. Okay? It means from Mount Sinai, roughly 3,300 years ago, to Isaiah, roughly 2,700 years ago. It's 600 years. So did the Jews fast during those 6 centuries or not? And he stood there, and I had this look because he understood the problem. And he had to say, of course they did. Isaiah was referring to something. So the question is, on what basis did Jews fast during the days of Joshua? On what basis did Jews fast during the period of the Judges, which predates Isaiah? The answer has to be based on an oral law. So what I'm showing is, not only by inference, and not only by the fact that it's impossible to keep the written Torah without knowing the oral Torah, I'm showing that explicitly that there had to be an oral Torah. It also, of course, the schism of the Karaites the schism of the Karaites demonstrates what happens when there's a personal fight and how dangerous it can be. But as it turns out, the Karaites maintain Jewish traditions, but they can't explain it. Like, they don't say God's name when they're reading from the Torah. Even if you went into, let's say, a Karaite synagogue in the land of Israel or in Turkey, and they're there, they don't pronounce the name of God when they're reading the Torah. The question is, on what basis don't they? They say, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. That's what they say. They don't say, pronounce the Tetragrammaton. Now, there are some guys in America who do that. Okay, I want to make that point. But the traditional Karaites don't do that. The question is, on what basis they don't do that? Now, we know from the oral tradition that you don't do that. But if you read the basic text, it says, don't take God's name in vain. What name is that referring to? Is it every name? And what does in vain mean? And how come Jews don't pronounce that four-letter name of God during prayer? That's not in vain. Without an orthodox, I can explain it, but the Karaites wouldn't dare define it. But they would ascribe other reasons to it. So that's the Karaite. That's what the Karaites are. It is a tragedy that emerged, that this schism was created. It is a relatively small movement. There was a lot of contention over it. Today, it's on the internet that it's big. In reality, to some great extent, the war is over. It means there was a real battle over this. But today, it's on the internet. You might think this is a huge movement, but that's not relevant. That's the difference between them. So I hope that answers your question. They're not like the Sadducees. Like the Sadducees denied any afterlife. The Sadducees were, for the most part, Hellenized. But it's true that the Sadducees denied the oral Torah for sure. The Sadducees were a priestly caste that was an elite caste. We see that the Essenes, from what's called the halachic document, were a version of Tzdukim, of Sadducees, who were actually responding to the oral Torah in an ancient document. But I'm probably going into an area that's way too sophisticated, way beyond the scope of this show.
Right.
But that gives you the sense of it. Thank you for that question.
Cool deal. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to this next caller. Caller, please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Yes, this is Barack from Southeast Missouri.
Hey, welcome to the show. What's the question for Rabbi?
Yes, my question is, what is the purpose of, I believe it's called the mezuzah? I've seen them in a Judaica shop in a synagogue that I've been attending in St. Louis, and I just, I never asked what they were for before. Gotcha.
So are you're not Jewish, right?
I'm in the process of converting over.
Oh, cool.
I attend my second conversion class today, actually.
Awesome. Okay, cool. We'll let Rabbi take this away. Thanks.
Yeah, so it's always best to go to the Bible. The Torah tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 6 that you should take these words and you should make them for a sign on your doorposts. So that's what the mezuzah. Mezuzah is one of the 613 commandments, where the Torah tells us that we have to, that we must take these words. This is the Shema. It includes a number of passages, and the Torah says that you should teach your children about that when you get up and go and it says you should bind these words to your arm and between your eyes, and then the Torah says, and you should write them on. You should write these words on a mezuzah, which is a signpost on your gate. So the Torah, we have a commandment, and that's Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 9. So the answer is the mezuzah is a commandment to inscribe the central creeds of the Jewish people on our doorposts as we're going in our house. That means it should always be in the forefront of our mind, the commandment to hear as the Lord is a God, the Lord is one, that we are to submit to the one God and no other God, and the Almighty is the one who took us out of Egypt. So the Almighty, blessed be His holy name, didn't just create us, but He was the God of history who's in our lives, and we're always aware of it. And traditionally, not only do Jews, of course, put the mezuzahs on their doorposts, but we do affectionately, this is a custom, we actually will frequently kiss it as we walk in and out, constantly keeping our mind in the forefront of our mind, and kissing it is a demonstration of affection for these sacred words. But it's a mitzvah, one of the 613 commandments in the Torah.
Wonderful. That's about as clear cut as you can get. All right, well, let's move on to the next caller. Caller, please tell us your name and where you're calling from. Caller, are you available? Can you hear us okay?
Hello?
Yep, there you go. You are live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Rodney calling from Indiana.
Rodney from Indiana? It's coming through a little garbled a little bit. I don't know if you're on speakerphone or maybe in a bad signal spot, but go ahead.
Rodney from Louisiana.
Rodney from Louisiana. Yeah, that's much better. Thank you. What's the question for Rabbi?
Yeah, I have a question. I kind of mentioned it on the chat. Is Yeshua or JC a form of golden calf, maybe that was created in the early year or something? When they was waiting for Moses to come back down from Sinai, they created the calf. And I was wondering if the people growing anxious in the first century, this is kind of a way the calf to.
Sounds like you do have a little bad signal. I think we got the gist of the question, though. Is the Jesus of the New Testament, or Yeshua, is he sort of like the golden calf type of a worship thing that's going on? Is that basically your question?
Yes, it is. I mean, I see it that way.
I agree. But let's see what Rabbi says.
Right. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you, Rodney. All right, take care. Shalom. All right, good deal.
So I've never been asked that question before. So that alignment. So is Christianity the golden calf? And you're talking about the Jesus of the New Testament.
Yeah, is it?
Okay. The golden calf occurred because the Jewish people were very, very connected to Moses. You have to remember that when the Jewish people witnessed the sea collapse on the Egyptian army and the bodies came on shore, they said, "Vayiminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe avdoi," the Torah says, and they trusted in God and Moses, his servant. Moshe Rabbeinu became so important to the children of Israel that it became worrisome to Moses. In fact, if you look at the Ten Commandments, as God is conveying these eternal oracles in Exodus chapter 20, what was happening at Mount Sinai, people would die. They were hearing God's voice. They were seeing something. It was smoke and fire, but the whole experience was overwhelming for them. And overwhelming is an understatement. Their souls would depart from them, and they couldn't take it because they were experiencing prophecy. And they actually turned to Moses and say, look, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I encourage you to read it. They said to Moses, look, we know now, we've heard God's voice, we know that you are speaking on God's behalf. Why don't you convey the rest of it to us? And Moses did, but he was reluctant. He actually asked them, why are you so afraid? So, why are you frightened? That's what he said. So he wasn't comfortable with the fact that they relied on him to such an extent. Moses' concern would create a huge problem, meaning his concern was on target, because when Moses went up to Mount Sinai, the Jews miscalculated, not all the Jews, we would find out later it was only 3,000 Jews, because those are the ones who were put to death, but a number of Jews miscalculated when Moses was to return, and just one moment, I apologize. Are you having trouble hearing me?
You know what? I am getting some feedback that it sounds real echoey, and it might be because you're in that room with a different microphone, just a bare room like that.
Can you right. It could be. No, my lapel mic is not feeding it. It's this mic.
Yeah,
here.
That's okay. It's okay. It's still manageable. It's just different than normal, but you're good. You can continue.
All right.
Just wanted to get that out of the way.
All right, good.
Thanks.
All right. So what ultimately happened was the Jewish people built the golden calf and it turned to an enormous catastrophe. The golden calf essentially was there to replace Moses, whom they thought died. Okay? But now there were among the Jews, I apologize for giving a complicated answer because the question is fusing things together. There was a mixed multitude among the children of Israel that said, "This is your God who took you out of Egypt." And it's clear because they're saying this is your God rather than this is our God. So now, when it comes to, let's go to Jesus. Now, how does this connect? This doesn't really connect at all to Jesus. The Jesus of the New Testament is a developing Jesus. You have different Christologies of who exactly Jesus was in the Christian Bible. How you can have an adoptionist version of Jesus, that Jesus was a ordinary person, not born of a virgin, nothing unusual about his birth, nothing worthy of mention about how he was conceived, and that would be Mark's understanding of Jesus, and that would what we call an adoptionist Christology. We're therefore introduced in the book of Mark following the incipit as an adult, where he is informed by a voice from heaven that you are my son. On this day I've begotten you. So Jesus discovers that he's chosen by God at his baptism. So that's one Christology. So when you say, what is the New Testament Jesus? It's not the same, because Christianity is developing very rapidly. We have the last gospel, and that's the Gospel of John. So if you date Mark to, let's say, 70, and John, let's say, to 95, the Christology of John would be an incarnation Christology, much more, I want to say, improved Jesus, a much more divine version of Jesus. He's not divine in the book of John. I mean, he is not the same as God created the heavens and the earth, but he is already something that was created. He wasn't just being born of a virgin wasn't good enough for John. It's not mentioned in John, but rather he was created somewhere in the distant past, this Logos, which you find in the prologue. But he is still completely subordinate to the Father. So that's a wide spectrum of who Jesus is in the New Testament. Who he is not is what Orthodox Christianity would today present Jesus as. Now, I'm using the word Orthodox in quotation marks because those who were Ebionites, those who rejected the teachings of the doctrine of the Trinity, also considered themselves Orthodox. And when I say the word Orthodox, I'm talking about the people who eventually won out. So today's Christianity is full-blown idolatry, meaning that almost all Christians, not all, but almost all Christians are either Trinitarians or they embrace some form of modalism, which means that the God, the Father, and the Son are just the same thing without a distinction of persons. But the key point is that Jesus is fully co-equal with the Father in some way or another, based on a formula that would emerge out of the Council of Nicaea and develop further what we would call the Nicene Creed. Now, you won't find the Nicene Creed anywhere in the Christian Bible because they didn't think about it yet. So it's hard to answer the question, the Jesus of the New Testament. Is it Paul's idea of who Jesus was? Is it Mark's, whoever wrote the book of Mark, is it his idea? But it is clearly in the Christian Bible, no matter which gospel you're looking at, Jesus emerging as something that has nothing to do with the concept of the Messiah in Tanakh, and something that's emerging as a Son of God, but not a Son of God in a traditional Jewish sense, rather in a Greek sense, which means, in essence, Mark will make a big deal about this, in essence being a representative of God and a divine representation of God. In Romans chapter 1, Paul will convey very sharply, that's an early doctrine in the Gospels, that Jesus became the Son of God at his crucifixion and resurrection. So the key is that, yes, Christianity in the first century is shooting towards Athens rather than Jerusalem. The earlier Christians, who no doubt rejected all this stuff, their Christology is not, they lose. The Christologies that are incarnation Christologies are winning. Paul certainly is winning the day. And ultimately, at the second century, you have Tertullian, early 3rd century now, who would coin the term Trinity, Latin Church father from Carthage, and then the church would go into battle over exactly how divine Jesus was. So the answer is it's an idolatry that is developing as we would expect to, because it's a man-made religion, and therefore you have augmentations and amendments as the constitution of Christianity is changing. That's what we'd expect. The Torah doesn't change. God is not a man that he would change his mind. He's not a mortal that he would relent. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 29. Because he's not a man. So right. Judaism is a stable frame. So you can, yes, absolutely. Jesus becomes this mediator, and that's a term that Paul would use, that there is one God and there's one mediator, there's one mediating God and man, and that's Jesus Christ. So you see, Paul is not up to what we would consider a Trinitarian belief, but Jesus is an intermediary. This is the danger that brought on the golden calf. So it's this intermediary idolatry that ultimately would lead to the complete debasement of the church and fall into a spin, and that's a tragedy, and it's a self-inflicted wound from which the church never recovered. And please God, we don't wish that anything should happen to Christians, but only that they should repent and turn back to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But thank you for your question.
I think it was kind of expressing more of like how similar the golden calf was to, because it's like, they reached out to a calf to worship God with. They wanted to worship God in their own way, and that's what Christianity is doing. So the similarities are very striking. But yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, good deal. All right. Oh, man, we had a caller, and they hung up. Okay, caller, here's the deal. When you call in, you need to be prepared to wait. So when you call in, you'll hear Rabbi talking, and it could take 5 minutes. It might take 25 minutes. So just call in, be patient, and then we'll get to your question. We're going to move forward to another question now. I'm going to put the phone lines back up on screen again. If the phone rings, then we'll take the caller. Otherwise, we'll just kind of read off what I've got here on. Let's see if I can find it here. I wasn't prepared because usually get so many calls. All right, so there it is right there. Okay, so I'm going to go with this. So there's one that's kind of long. I'm going to go with the simpler one for now. Are the biblical magi, the three wise men, mentioned anywhere in the Hebrew Scriptures? Is that concept anyway like connected to Judaism?
No.
Next question. No, I'm just kidding.
Let me
go ahead.
Actually, as it turns out, the Magi you find in it's completely unique to Matthew's infancy narrative, which is very different than the only other infancy narrative found in the book of Luke. When I say different, I mean different. It's beyond the scope of this question. As it turns out, it doesn't say anywhere in Matthew, even in Matthew, that there are three Magi. There's no number given for them, but this is nowhere found in the Torah. The source for Magi, so that in the King James renders it as wise men, but the Greek word is really, so the word is a Latin derivative, and the Latin derivative is really a Greek derivative, but the Greek actually is not where it starts. That word actually you could trace back to a Persian word that refers to the Zoroastrian, which is a ancient Persian religion, a dualistic religion, and how they refer to their priestly caste. So that's where it comes. This is full-blown. This comes from the world of idolatry. This does not come from Mount Sinai. It's nowhere found in the Torah. But the key is that we are told in Matthew a story of these magi, or as they're called in the King James, we'll just call them wise men. But what we encounter in Matthew is an infancy narrative where these people are coming from the east, presumably from what is modern day Iran would definitely be the East. The idea is that they're following a star. And incidentally, the Zoroastrian priests were noted for their ability to read the stars and to be able to perform magic and perform rituals based on the reading of the stars. So that's where Matthew is dipping into. He's not dipping into anything holy. And the key, the rub of these individuals is they're not Jewish. And they're following a star that's apparently moving slow enough for them to follow. It's a kind of magic star, and the star is bringing them to Jerusalem, to Herod's palace, and it stops over the Herod's palace. We're told in Matthew chapter 2, which I always found interesting, because if you looked at a starry night and you saw a star, you'd ask yourself, what house is that star over? But what the author of Matthew has in mind is some magical star. And the wise men, or the Magi, ask Herod, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? Where is the Messiah come from? Herod, of course, doesn't know, but he knows that his scribes are aware of this, and that's when we get to famously Matthew chapter 2, verse 6, which is where they are informed by the scribes, by the Jews, the knowledgeable Jews, that in fact the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem. And a passage from Micah 5:1 and the Christian Bible 5:2 is quoted. And I use the word quoted in quotation marks, italicized with neon lights, because the text has been shattered, been ripped to pieces. Matthew misquotes, as he does in all of his fulfillment of the citations, the original passage, and he shaves off the end of the verse. It's beyond the scope of this show to go into that. It's a different show on a different question, but the key is the text was molested. There's no other way to describe it. But the key is that Matthew wants to have Jesus born in Bethlehem. And the reason for it is not because it says that in Micah, as a Christian would be taught, but because David himself was from Bethlehem, and he and Luke both wanted Jesus to be born in the city of David, the city where David was born. They each would use a different plot device to make that happen, a complete contradictory plot device. The key is that they then head off, following the star to Bethlehem, and the star then hovers over the home of the newborn baby Jesus. Matthew's infancy narrative doesn't include a barn, doesn't include a manger, because Matthew's infancy narrative has Joseph and Mary come from Bethlehem. So it's over the home of Jesus. And the key point is that that's when they visit Jesus, and that's where all that takes place. But they are alerted by an angel not to go back to the east after bringing gifts to the child and basically worshiping the child. They're told not to use the same route that they came, but to go another way, because Herod is going to kill the child. And they go back through another route, and they're gone. They disappear from the story. They're off the stage of Matthew's theater. The question, of course, is, I just want to add this in here, is why does Matthew have the Magi go to Herod's palace? What does that add to the story? It means, if the star is a magic star that knew where Jesus' home was, and clearly, as Matthew tells the story, the star does know, because all they're told is the city that Jesus is born in, the Messiah is born in. They're not told which street he lives on, what his house number is, so why stop off at Herod's palace? And the answer is, this is already a setup. The setup is, it's a contrast already between the Jew and the Gentile in the Christian Bible. If you want to know why Christians hated the Jews, they weren't crazy. The New Testament poisoned their minds, and this is already set up in the infancy. Look at the contrast between how the Jews, the representative of the Jews, deal with Jesus, and how Gentiles deal with Jesus. Whereas the Gentiles, these Magi, whoever they are, these clearly non-Jews, when they discover the Messiah, the infant Messiah, they worship him and bring gifts. And adore him, the representative of the Jews, Herod, wants to kill him. That's the key. That's the setup. And this is the setup for the crucifixion, because only in Matthew's passion narrative, now we're moving 26 chapters later, only in Matthew's passion narrative are we introduced to Pontius Pilate's wife, who has a dream and discovers that Jesus is completely innocent of any charges brought against him. Pontius Pilate and his wife stand squarely against the hordes of Jews who are also again trying to kill Jesus. So I want to take this question further. So the term magi, its derivative, literally is the word structure actually is Persian, then Greek, then Latin. Okay, that is not just about the word. It's the story. The whole story is completely of pagan origin. It's really a Persian origin that you would have such people. They were very important in the Zoroastrian world, and it would emerge as very important in Greco-Roman thinking as a result. But it was borrowed, not invented in the Greco-Roman world. But the key point is they are the setup, because they're the innocent Gentiles who ultimately come down on the side of Jesus, just like later on Pontius Pilate and his wife, the innocent Gentiles, come down on the side of Jesus, whereas the hordes of angry, Christ-killing, God-killing Jews are calling for the death of Jesus and saying these toxic words, for which the Jews will pay a very heavy price for. We take his death upon us and our children. Only found in the book of Matthew. So what I'm showing is not just what the word is and its origins are. It has nothing to do with the Torah. There's nothing sacred about it, because it doesn't come again from Mount Sinai or Jerusalem. It comes from Persia. It comes from modern day Iran, Zoroastrianism, which is a very significant dualistic religion that still exists, but it has nothing to do with Judaism.
Okay, very good, cool. All right, we're going to move on to another question. We're going to keep going back until the phone rings to the written question we have in by text. So I'm going to start reading this off. This is a little bit long, but it's a really good point regarding the LXX. Okay, so I'm just going to read it verbatim, start to finish. This is from Charles. From Houston. Rabbi Tovia, thank you for being thorough and scholarly in your approach. How much better the world would be if there were more rabbis. However, I love the howevers. However, isn't there a bit of license being taken on your part to say that the Christian Bible went back with bleach to change Isaiah 7:14 to read virgin, when the much older pre-Christ Septuagint is where this translation originates? In case readers are not aware, the LXX Septuagint is widely regarded as the oldest and most accurate translation of Tanakh by objective scholars, especially since the revelation of the Qumran scrolls support the LXX against the much newer Masoretic text. In fact, the Jewish historian Josephus joins all other historians in declaring that King Ptolemy gathered 6 Torah scholars from each of the 12 tribes, 72 in all, hence the name LXX, and separated them into private rooms for the purpose of individually translating Torah into Greek, and that the miraculous result being that each translation was exactly the same. This indeed is a verifiable miracle of the power of Hashem to protect and preserve the accuracy of his sacred instructions, Torah. And in that translation, Isaiah 7:14 reads, God himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. God is with us. For indeed, it is no sign at all for a young woman to be found pregnant and to give birth to a son. May we allow the word of God to reveal itself to us. Wow, that's a pretty in your face. You don't know what you're talking about, Rabbi. Let's hear what you answer.
Well, this person, in a sense, answered his own question, but may have not realized that. I think the viewers first need to understand what the point that's being made. Matthew and Luke, out of the 27 books of the Christian Bible, will assert only those 2 books in the Christian Bible will assert that Jesus was conceived miraculously and born in Bethlehem. But the key is the virgin part. Whereas Luke discusses Jesus being born of a virgin in his very elaborate infancy narrative, Matthew will do what Matthew typically does, and that is he will, in a very graphic sense, say that he will use what's called a fulfillment citation, which means Matthew, specifically referring to Matthew chapter 1, verse 20, and culminating in verse 23. That's our key. That's the key passage. Matthew says the fact that Jesus was conceived to a virgin, this is not an accident. This is not an arbitrary event. Oh no, it was foretold in the prophet. Foretold that in fact, and here's verse 23, and it says, and Matthew says, "Behold, the Lord of his own will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel," which means God is with us. Now, if you have any Christian Bible that has footnotes, cross-references, it will always cross-reference this to Isaiah 7:14. Stop for a moment. This passage does not exist. This passage was mistranslated, and it was not a mistake. It wasn't a whoops. It wasn't that whoever came up with this just misapprehended what the text says. This was a deliberate mistranslation of the Jewish scriptures, because the key words here, namely a virgin, we'll talk about that word, is found nowhere in the Jewish scripture. There is no such passage in the Jewish scriptures, and the word virgin, a virgin is somebody. The word virgin, there's only one way to say a virgin in Hebrew. When I say Hebrew, I'm speaking now both of biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew, and that's betulah. There is no other way to convey virginity, certain virginity. And the key point here is virginity is conveying one thing, and that's sexual history. It has nothing to do with a person's gender or a person's age. It means that this person never slept with anyone. That's what the word means. The word in Isaiah 7:14 is the word alma, which is the feminine version of the word elam. And this word doesn't mean a virgin. This word means alma, means a young woman. Ha alma has the prefix, the definite article, means the young woman, the young woman. As it turns out, it is young women that have babies and not old women. So if it fits perfectly. If Isaiah wanted to say virgin, he knew exactly how to use the word, because the word betulah appears in the book of Isaiah 5 times. It's a very popular word in Tanakh where virginity is very important. Isaiah doesn't use that word, and Matthew changes the book of Isaiah, and he not just changes the word, he renders the word alma as a virgin, but he takes out the definite article. The text says that the woman's already pregnant. He makes it into a future prophecy. She will conceive. Actually, his horror means she is with child. It actually says v'karas, means she will call his name Emmanuel. But Matthew can't have Mary call Jesus Emmanuel, because she never does. So Matthew will change it. They will call his name Emmanuel. I don't want to get into all that because I'm going to confuse you. Now, what do Christian Bibles do? So traditionally what Christians' Bible do is, here's where they abandon the Hebrew, and in Isaiah, in order to make sure that Matthew, the author of Matthew, doesn't look like a criminal, a spiritual criminal who manipulated Jewish scriptures, they have to get rid of all the fingerprints. And in order to do that is in their translations, typically, not all, but in the King James, and certainly going back to our Vulgate of our good friend Jerome, all those translations are going to, in Isaiah, put in the word virgin, so that Isaiah 7:14, the Christian Bible, will comport with Matthew 1:23. So a Christian who's looking at the Christian Bible, at his Bible, will go to Matthew 1:23, and then can go right to Isaiah 7:14 and go, oh, it's the same thing. Isaiah says virgin and Matthew says virgin. So the point is that the Christian Bibles clean it up, meaning they protect Matthew, they create a barrier for Matthew so that Matthew is not can't be charged with textual misdeeds. I want to make a notation here. Not all Christian Bibles do this. There are Christian Bibles that are more honest, and certainly modern Christian Bibles, like the New Revised Standard Version, the New English Bible, they all reject this nonsense, and they will right there smack. If you go to Isaiah 7:14, they will admit that the word is young woman, it's not a virgin, and they translate it that way. I don't want you to think every single Christian Bible in the world does this, engages in this kind of manipulation. Some of them distance themselves from this practice, but this is the pervasive practice in almost all Christian Bibles in the world. Now, question is, how do Christians respond to this? How do they deal with this? Because if the text in Isaiah doesn't say virgin, but it says a young woman, which with no reference to virginity, then Matthew lied. Whoever wrote the book of Matthew changed the word of God, and therefore the book of Matthew can't be holy, and the whole Christian religion stands or falls on the credibility of the New Testament. And if the first gospel is a liar, then the whole church collapses. So of course Christians can't live this way. Now, when I say Christians, I don't mean your average Christian that you meet. These people are good people, generally speaking. It's the doctors of the church that did this. So what did they do? They changed the text. The word alma, just to make this point further, means a young woman, meaning it's the feminine with the hey at the end. There's also a masculine version, an LM. An LM is a young man. And for example, King David, famously, he's called an LM, same word, just in the masculine, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 56, and chapter 20, verse 22. Same word that's used there. Was David also a virgin? And how come the Christian Bibles never render 1 Samuel 17, verse 56, and 20, verse 22 as that David was a virgin? It instead calls him a lad, a strapling, whatever it is. A young man, call him a million things. They'll never call him a virgin. Why didn't they change 1 Samuel 17 and 20? The answer is because it had no Christological implications. And of course, it's ridiculous saying that David was a virgin. Just to explain this point to you. Okay, now, here's where the next part gets in. That at first sounds like an interesting point. And what the argument Christians will make is the one that you've heard this fellow make. If I didn't give this introduction, you wouldn't understand it. What Christians will say is, well, when was the Jewish Bible first translated into a foreign language? So the answer will say is the Septuagint, or in Hebrew it's the Targum Shivim, that was essentially a translation rendered by Jews, learned Jews, some 2,200, let's say 2,300 years ago, where great learned men, according to this tradition that the fellow quoted, they will tell you, translated the Bible into the Greek language. And strangely, if you go to Amazon, you order a Septuagint and you look it up, or it's available online because the copyright's over, it will say in Isaiah 7:14, the Greek word that will be employed there is the word Parthenos, which means a virgin. So the argument is, you see that this old translation, which according to Josephus, this is the argument, and to what's called a letter Aristide, but we're not going to get into that, and other sources, was really almost miraculously produced, this translation, and there they're using a word that says virgin, meaning Parthenos in Greek. Now, the truth is, I don't want to go off the thing here, but the word Parthenos doesn't necessarily mean a virgin in Greek, particularly at that time. You could see Dina's, after she was raped, was called that. But I want to just stay at the point. The point is this whole thing is complete nonsense. First of all, how could any translation, before we even go to the point, how could any translation be superior to the original? That's nonsense. That means, how could any person say that a translation is superior to an original language? If you're a lawyer, you know what the law of best evidence means. You learned that in your first year of law school. The law of best evidence is really simple. And that is that the original contract, the original document, has to be superior to any translation that's presented to a court. And the court will throw out any translation. If the original text was written in English, and someone brings in a Spanish translation that differs from the original, they say the Chinese translation is irrelevant. Well, what what does translations are? Who cares what a translation says? If the Hebrew is the word of God, then the Hebrew is the word of God. It doesn't make a difference if they put in there, if an orangutan, it doesn't make a difference. But the real stupidity is the fact. Excuse me, I didn't mean to call this individual stupid. The foolishness of this is that, in fact, the original Septuagint was not of Tanakh, of the Jewish scriptures, but only of the 5 books of Moses. And this questioner actually said this, but because he probably was copying and pasting it from somewhere. And that is that the original Targum Shivim, this translation from the Hebrew into Greek, put together by 72, we'll call them rabbis or learned men, was only of the Torah, only of the 5 books of Moses, only the law of Moses. And if he looked again at his sources, he would see that Josephus says it was the law of Moses. The same thing is in the letter Aristide, where it comes from. It's only the 5 books of Moses. What I just said is not controversial, which means that no Christian scholar would argue with this. Now, your Sunday school teacher will all tell you this. If you're a Christian, of course, they will all just say, "Oh, they were quoting the Septuagint." Well, why would the Holy Spirit, who's whispering in Matthew's ear, why would God be quoting from any translation? But the Septuagint was only the 5 books of Moses. The book of Isaiah is not a part of the 5 books of Moses. The book of Isaiah comes from the part of Tanakh that's the prophetic part, and therefore, the book of Isaiah. There was no original Septuagint. Now, later on, here is the rub where everyone gets confused. And that is that subsequently, there was a translation done, let's say 2,250 years ago, of the 5 books of Moses into Greek. That translation was done for Ptolemy, and it was put in the library in Egypt. That what's really today called the Proto-Septuagint was destroyed. We don't have it. If you have that Septuagint, you're a very wealthy person. No one has it. It's gone, except we have quotes from it in the Talmud and Tractate Megillah 9a and b, where the Talmud gives us 14 quotes from it. But it's only the 5 books of Moses. No one disagrees with this point. When people say virtually all scholars, when this fellow just said virtually all scholars agree with this, I don't want to be insulting. But it's just crazy, just insane. No scholars believe this. This is only common. This is like Christians believing that Jesus was born December 25th. Only, that's stuff you learn in Sunday school. But no Christian scholar would ever stake out that claim. And most Christians would concede that December 25th is based on the festival in the ancient world of the winter solstice. So no scholar believes this. The original is the Hebrew, and in fact, the whole point of, I won't say the whole, the most important aspect of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the thing that is, there are many reasons why the Dead Sea Scrolls are important to us. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. It was a series of discoveries that began in 1947 when a Bedouin named Muhammad Adib threw a rock and discovered these scrolls, and then subsequent caves were discovered with all kinds of scrolls and fragments and so on. There are many valuable elements that we discovered from the Dead Sea Scrolls, but most importantly is that the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures that we have today, and every book except for the book of Esther was discovered are intact. The Jews didn't change it. They're not corrupted. We have the Isaiah scroll, which is on display. You could go online and see every single fragment, every single scroll online. And the Hebrew words the Hebrew word there is Alma. It's not Betula. So, Jerome, I encourage you to read Jerome's Introduction to Chronicles, where he says explicitly everything that I'm sharing with you. Now, what happens, this is what gets everybody in trouble. After the loss of that Proto-Septuagint, the 5 books of Moses, so subsequently Greek translations are going to be rendered. After all, the Greek language was the lingua franca, was the not quite what English is today, but in the empire it was the big language. So of course, for people who are not literate, the Bible will be rendered into Greek, and certainly it will be done for Christians. Christians are not going to. Christians did not read or speak Hebrew. Certainly by the time you get to the 2nd and 3rd century. Origen, however, was fluent in Hebrew. Origen was really quite a brilliant 3rd century, we'll call him a church father, scholar, and so on, wrote. Origen was the one who would most contribute to what you find in today's Septuagint. And what they did was, when producing Greek translations of the Bible, they would put the Christological words in their Greek translation, meaning to comport with Matthew, and therefore in the Isaiah 7:14 of the Greek translations, that's not from what those learned rabbis did, because rabbis never translated Isaiah. They only translated Genesis through Deuteronomy. These subsequent Greek translations, they put in all these Christologies to make sure that Matthew is covered. But here is the problem. The problem is they didn't call it Origen's translation. They didn't call it, this is the translation of Lucerne. They didn't do that. They said, this is the Septuagint. They used that original term. So the term became genericized. Every subsequent translation was called the Septuagint, and given the inscription LXX, which is 70, meaning referring to the 70 or 72 rabbis that originally translated. So all the Greek translations that would follow were given this name. And the term became, every Greek translation was called the Septuagint. Now, but the Septuagint that we have in our hands today is a Christian product. Everything I'm telling you, you will find in any introduction to a Septuagint you buy from any bookstore. Nothing I've sent to you is controversial. It is controversial in a Christian high school. It is shocking to kids because they're not taught this. But every Christian scholar, real Christian scholar, knows what I'm saying. And every introduction to any Septuagint you buy on Amazon will say this in the introduction. There's nothing I'm saying that's like Singer somehow invented this to make Christianity look bad. But translations can't be better, no matter who translates. You have the original. The original says Alma, it doesn't say Besua. Over. In fact, we have in Proverbs, very clearly, in Proverbs chapter 30, look at verse 19 and 20, you see there explicitly that we have an Alma, Derek Geva be Alma, the way of a man with a woman, with a young woman, and it describes her as a complete adulteress, that she is compared to a snake that means when she commits adultery, it leaves no sign of the fornication that she committed, just like a snake that slithers over a rock, just like an eagle that flies through the sky. After it passes through the sky, it leaves no trace, just like a ship passing through the sea. So is the adulterous woman. She washes herself. I didn't do anything wrong. So there, clearly, here's an explicit reference to the word Alma in Tanakh, written by Shlomo HaMelech, by King Solomon of blessed memory, a great prophet, and there the word Alma is talking about someone who's an adulterous woman. So therefore this is complete nonsense, and the only credible text is the original text, the Hebrew. Now what he does is he again slips in again. I don't think this person is insincere. In fact, I'm sure he's not. This is routinely taught this way. When he says that all scholars know this, no, not at all. The original Hebrew is what's important, not the translation. One other point he mentioned I want to toss out the window. He said, what kind of sign would there be if it was a young woman who conceived and had a child? Because the text says, behold, the Lord himself will give you sign. Behold, the young woman is with the child. Now, his argument is, if it's just a young woman who gets pregnant and has a child, so that's natural. It happens 5,000 times every minute. There's no miracle there. What's the sign? There's no miracle. But if it's a virgin who conceives, that's a sign. Because after all, what virgins don't conceive? So again, this is a tremendous mistake. twofold mistake. Mistake is that the conception of the child is not the sign. The sign is rather the maturity of the child. If you continue, which, sorry, if you hate my guts, what are you going to jump out the window? If you continue reading Isaiah 7:14, but then go to verse 15, 16, says, before the child will be eating cream and honey when he knows to reject good and bad, for before this happens, these two kings will be destroyed. The sign is the maturity of the child, not the conception of the child. So, therefore, two, a sign is not necessarily miraculous. It can be. A sign, however, must be something, think for a moment, a sign must be something that you can see. Right. A sign is always something to see. You have a stop sign, nothing miraculous about it, but it's a sign you can see. We find in the Torah, the rainbow is a sign for a covenant that God made that will never bring another flood. There's nothing miraculous about a rainbow. Water particles in the atmosphere, light passes through it, and they become like a prism, breaking into colors. What's the miracle? None, but it's certainly visible. So sign is not necessarily miraculous. It can be, but surely doesn't. Sign doesn't mean just something you could see. And think for a moment, how could a virgin conception, no doubt, virgins conceiving, although there's something called parthenogenesis, but we'll just toss it out the window. Let's just say that virgins conceiving children would be a miracle. Let's just say that and just throw all this, ignore any scientific. Let's just say that. You can't see it. Stop for a moment. I want to repeat that. If I concede everything to you, you have a big problem. You can't see a virgin birth. That means what would it be about a virgin, a baby coming out of the womb of a virgin? How would that indicate to you that you could see it? No one could see it. The only person who knew that she was a virgin would have been Mary. You can't see it. Therefore, you could say that a virgin having a child would be miraculous, but it does not fulfill the fundamental requisite of it being something that can be visually identified. How do you identify that a virgin gives birth? If a woman is giving birth, how do you know that she's a virgin as when the baby comes out? You can't know that. So by definition, a virgin conception cannot be a sign. It could be a miracle. Now, in the pagan world, this was all the emperors Romulus, the fictional founder of Rome, he was conceived by a virgin and so on. Well, I don't want to get into that right now. The key point is, number one is the sign is not the conception, the sign is the maturity of the child. Number two is a virgin conception would not be a sign. You can't see it. How do you see a virgin conceived? You can see a rainbow, as an example, Genesis 8. But you cannot see a virgin birth. Who saw it? So what? What would you see? So therefore, it doesn't fulfill. So the answer is all nonsense. The Hebrew is the original, and the Greek is not the original. As it turns out, I show in my book in volume 1 that even of the 5 books of Moses, what in today's Septuagint is not the original from the original Septuagint. I demonstrate because the quotes in the Talmud, only 2 of them are extant in today's Septuagint. There's actually a variety of sources for the Septuagint of today, but it should not be called a Septuagint. And that term, calling today's Greek translation a Septuagint, is what fools them, because they think there's only one Greek translation, and that's the Septuagint done 2,250 years ago, and this is complete nonsense. And then you have to ask the question, I would pose this to any thinking Christian. You must think about this for a moment. You have been taught to believe, and if I'm wrong, then I don't know what universe you come from. You've been taught to believe the book of Matthew is a holy book, divinely inspired, and whoever wrote it, or no, you've been taught that Matthew, a disciple, wrote it, that Matthew didn't write it from his own head, but the Holy Spirit inspired him to write it. Well, why would the Holy Spirit be going to a Greek translation? Why, if Matthew was a prophet and a disciple of Jesus, and he received the oracles of his book that makes up his 28-chapter book, came from God, why would God go, hold on a moment, I forgot Hebrew, I haven't written the book in 500 years, let me look it up. That's crazy. It means, why would God go, let me check, can I just check there's a translation, I want to, and one more point, I don't know, I think I ever made this. I want to say this to evangelicals, I want you to listen to me very carefully. If I asked you, why don't you believe that the Book of Mormon is the Word of God? There are many reasons that you will offer of why you reject the Book of Mormon. But one of them, not the foremost reason, but one of them is that the Book of Mormon verbatim quotes, 19th century book, is quoting the King James Version, and specifically in the Jacobean English, which means going back to the earlier English of the 16th century, of the 17th century. And multiple chapters, straight King James in the Book of Mormon. And you evangelical Christians correctly and rightfully mock Mormonism for this and say, what kind of idiot would believe that the angel Moroni would convey to Joseph Smith somewhere in the United States the Jewish Bible in the King James? Why would an angel be speaking in the King James using a Jacobean English? How's that possible? That's obviously nonsense. Obviously, Joseph, this whole thing is nonsense. So you're smart. I don't mean this in a way that is derisive. I'm sorry if it sounds that way. Obviously, I care about you, and that's why I express it. So you know that this makes no sense, that an angel Moroni would quote more than 20 chapters in the book of Isaiah alone, word for word, in the Book of Mormon, and you therefore know that the Book of Mormon can't be from an angel, because why would an angel from God be quoting a King James Version? And this is, this, you've been taught this. No, and that's right, you're right on the money. No angel of God would be speaking would be quoting a King James. Well, if you are able to use that kind of critical thinking and apply it to your rejection of Mormonism, please consider applying that same great thinking to the Septuagint. Why would God be quoting from a Greek translation? That's nonsense. God would be quoting from the Jewish scriptures, as he does in the prophets, quoting from the Torah directly, not from some Assyrian or God knows whatever translation. So that's all nonsensical. So it doesn't say it. The Septuagint is only the 5 books of Moses. The sign is something you could see. It's not the conception of the child, and therefore, no scholars believe this. Yes, the kid growing up in Alabama believes this. They're told this. The Septuagint is never mentioned in the Christian Bible. Matthew never says that this is a quote from the Septuagint. There's no source for this in the Christian Bible. But Christians will have to come up with this response, because if Matthew mischaracterized what Isaiah conveyed, which he did, that means that the book of Matthew is a book that is completely corrupt, and then the whole credibility of the church collapses along with the book of Matthew. And this is the only way to rescue the book of Matthew was by creating a fictitious translation of the book of Matthew, or a corrupt translation of the book of Matthew. An original has to be superior to a translation by any means. But thank you for that question.
Right, wonderful. That is such that's probably one of the greatest topics, I think, of the entire Christian Bible, is that whole Isaiah 7:14 thing, because there's so many variances of things that they have overlooked, and just really are totally unclear on. So that's really cool. Okay, so we're going to before we take this next caller, it would do me well for my own benefit, so I don't forget. I want to bring up your 2-book volume set. I know he gets bashful when I do this, but it's okay. I'm going to do it anyway. So Rabbi's 2-book volume set, you can still get at Amazon, Amazon.com. I'm going to try to pull up his website, too. I want you to see. Some of you haven't actually been to Rabbi Singer's web. Whoa, okay. That's what you'll hear when you go to Rabbi Singer's website, apparently. Let's see, what screen is this? This is screen capture. There it is right there. Okay, cool. So on your screen right now, you'll see the website for Rabbi Tovia Singer. If you don't have the audio for the 2-volume book set, you can't buy it anymore. Maybe we'll be able to at some point, but right now it's out of print. But the 24 CD set that goes so well with these books, you can find the actual audio files free on his website by going right here where it says free audio. Click on free audio. And as soon as this thing responds, you can go down and you can see, let's see, well, this thing won't scroll for some reason. Here we go. There it goes. Okay, so like right here, you can see all these titles here. What are we doing wrong and they're doing right? All these titles you're going to find in the 2-book volume set. okay? And so what you do is when you're reading your book, you go to whatever volume you're in, whatever chapter you're in, look for the corresponding titles. And you want to listen to these audio files along with the book. That's not a reading of the book. It's actually an explanation of what's written in the book, so you're getting double the information. If you haven't done this before, you're really, really missing out. It's like watching a 3D movie with, one eye closed and no 3D glasses. That's the best way I can actually express it. So, outreachjudaism.org, and then also his other website, toviasinger.tv. It's really, really awesomely laid out. You can see all of his public speaking arrangements, radio shows, small clips that he's created from our shows. And if you're wondering what song he plays at the end of his little modules, you're going to have to send Rabbi. You have to ask that question to Rabbi because he's got the available link on that. So my intro and exit music is always the same. So I get messages from time to time asking what song is played at the end of, which is Olam, excuse me. And you can probably let everybody know where they can find that or how they can get a copy of it. But yeah, this is it. This are two great websites for sure. And again, you can find the books and CDs. There's also DVDs of his lectures. There's a 2-part DVD. There's DVD of the fascinating facts hidden in the Book of Chronicles. Lots of other good stuff there. You want to go to the website or go to Amazon and search these things out. So, okay, Rabbi, this will be our last question for the day. So, caller, please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Yeah, this is Rodney from Louisiana again.
Yes, sir.
I don't mean to call you a second time.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead. You got another question for Rabbi?
Yeah, it's on conversion.
Okay.
I'll leave it simple on conversion. Is reform or conservative an option? I don't agree with all their doctrines that they put forth. I'm more along the lines of reform. Not reform, Orthodox. Their belief seems to be more in line with what I'm reading and what I believe. That's mainly my question: is a conversion other than Orthodox? Is it valid? Is it recognized? Is it valid?
Recognized by whom?
Hello?
Recognized by whom, Rodney? You're asking, is a reform or conservative conversion, are they recognized? Recognized by who?
Well, I shouldn't say recognized. Are they a good, valid conversion? I should say.
Gotcha.
Are they,
that's good.
Are they a real, sincere, valid conversion, or it's more spiritually I'm seeking than it is anything else? And I've looked into
Rodney, that's good. You explained it well. He's got your question. Thank you so much for calling back in. It's another good question you bring up. All right, my friend. Shalom, shalom. Take care. All right, Rabbi, take it away.
All right. So let me explain what happens when someone converts to Judaism. They are going through the process that people who are born Jewish went through at Mount Sinai. In essence, when the children of Israel were at Mount Sinai, they recited the words, Na'aseh v'nishma, that we will do and we will listen to the Torah, they will follow the Torah. That means it's called Kabbalah Torah. We accept the Torah at Mount Sinai and to perform it. And therefore, when someone is saying, I wish to be a Jew today, you have to do what we did. Now, there are other parts to it. Circumcision for a man. There was a sacrifice of Korban Todah that was brought. We don't have a sacrificial system today, but we immerse in a mikvah. But I don't want to discuss the circumcision and the immersion in a mikvah because the Reform movement uses a mikvah, saying mikvah presumably. And if a Reform rabbi insists on a circumcision, let's just say it's the same thing. The issue is that it's not about the Reform or conservative movement. It's about if a person is converting, did they accept upon themselves the keeping of the Torah? And when they said this, that they're going to keep the Torah and observe it and it's from God, did they say it before a court of 3 judges? who believe this. And the problem is today that it's not against the conservative movement, and many reformative rabbis are very fine people, but the problem is that in the Reform Movement's seminary in Cincinnati, Hebrew Union, in the conservative movement's seminary in New York at JTS, for example, they teach documentary hypothesis as truth. That means that the Torah wasn't from God, that Moses did not write the Torah, and that the national revelation at Mount Sinai did not occur. Certainly the Reform. There are some conservative rabbis who are traditional, and I want to make a caveat here. I know a few Reform rabbis personally who are very traditional, who do believe this, but they are way the exception. So therefore, in a Reform conversion, it's not about who's in charge or who has power. The problem is that the Reform movement has completely rejected the notion that the Torah was given by God at Mount Sinai to Moses, the written oral Torah, and that it's binding, all the mitzvahs are binding on the Jewish people. The Reform movement doesn't teach that. They will certainly say certain commandments they should keep, and they do, but other commandments they have jettisoned entirely. And a Reform rabbi will tell you this. I mean, this is not like some conspiracy thing. And in truth, that the young rabbis today in the Reform movement were really great kids in the Reform movement who often grew up in NIFTY, the Reform Movement's youth organization, and went to camps, and they were the best kids and so on. And then they went on to be Reform rabbis. And this is what they're taught as absolute fact, that there was no national revelation, that there really was documentary hypothesis. Means a lot of things, but very importantly, that the Torah is not 3,300 years old, given by Moses, but actually was written by different groups, EPJ and a whole series of groups that basically stitched texts together that were authored much later. This is complete blasphemy. I don't know what else to say. That means that if a person denies that the Torah is given at Mount Sinai, then how could you accept upon yourself the Torah at Mount Sinai? That's inconceivable. Now, one other caveat, and that is there are people who go to Reform congregations who don't know anything of what I've said, and who completely believe the Torah is entirely holy and is from Moses. They believe it. They just have never been taught otherwise, so they have a traditional view. There are some. This does not represent the majority, but there are a few here and there. But in truth, if you're coming from a Christian world, evangelical Christian world, which believes that the Torah is from God, that has a traditional view that the 5 books of Moses was given by the Almighty, blessed be his holy name, to Moses after the Jewish people came out of Egypt, after the Exodus. So, but the rabbi doesn't believe that, and the rabbis are all taught differently, and therefore they espouse differently. And frankly, I'll say this, that what really, I'm sorry to say, I wish the Reform movement in their seminary, when they have their brightest and best, I wish they would at least say that there's a traditional view and this view. They don't even do that. I mean, this is taught as absolute fact. So how could a person convert to Judaism if they reject the most core fundamental belief in Judaism, that is, Torah is from God and Moses is the supreme prophet? So it's not a rejection of Reform, that we don't like the word, we're angry at anyone or anything like that. It's just that the Reform movement has jettisoned this fundamental core principle of Judaism, and although it adopts many nice traditions of Judaism, but if it jettisons the fundamental belief that Torah is from God and does not insist that a convert keep the Torah, then the conversion is not a conversion. That's the problem. The term Orthodox is really a rather modern term. Before the Reform movement was created more than 2 centuries ago, that was actually that word was Orthodox, which means just the correct opinion, was not created by a Jew, but it was just Judaism. But the Reform movement, as a result, the Enlightenment in Germany made changes, and there was a development, but they ultimately rejected the Torah as a God-given document. They would do this in a series of votes, and today the Reform movement, although the liturgy might be very similar to a traditional synagogue, if you're coming from a Christian background and then evangelical Christian background, and you go and get the viewpoint, hear the viewpoint of the Reform movement of the Torah, you will probably flip out and say, "What happened here?" And that's unfortunate. So that's why I would not recommend, you should have an Orthodox conversion, meaning a conversion where there is a genuine Kabbalah Torah, which means the Torah is from God, it's binding, it's divinely inspired, it's heaven-breathed, it's unalterable, it's uncorruptible, and it applies to each and every generation. That's the answer to your question. It's not a personal attack against Reform Jews, certainly, who very often, most of what I've just said, they're not aware of. And there are some Reform Jews who are very traditional, not even aware of anything I've just said. But certainly, if you asked, there are exceptions. I have a very dear friend who's a Reform rabbi in the United States. I have two of them who are totally traditional. And they feel whatever it is that the Reform movement is their way of within the movement, it's fine. So it's not like the Reform movement says, if you believe a traditional view, they'll throw you out. It's like not North Korean Judaism, but in truth, the Reform movement rejects the divine origins of the Torah. The Torah was directly from that. Moses was Moses conveyed every message that God gave him word for word, and therefore that conversion is not valid, because the person who doesn't accept the Torah did not go through what the Jews went through at Mount Sinai a little more than 3,300 years ago. And let it be that the children of Israel will return, and the neshamas will return, because I want to just convey this point, and that is that if you really, really want to be a Jew, I will say to you that not only should you seek out conversion, we're not a proselytizing religion, but if you want to be a Jew, you shouldn't give up that pursuit. But you should also research your genealogy simultaneously, because it's quite possible that you're a descendant of Jews and are not aware of it, and that's why you are called in such a powerful way to convert, because a person does not have to become Jewish to be right by God. Ben Noach embraces Judaism as a faith, but doesn't join the nation as a people, and they have a place in the world to come, and they're right by God, and so on. So that's the answer to that question. I'm saying this in a sensitive way. I hope I didn't offend anyone, because there are so many Jews who are in the Reform Conservative movement who probably could take offense at this, and I don't want to do that. The people we're talking to today are not Abraham Geiger, the Ned Elmer Berger. These people have long died. And the young people, the wrong Reform rabbis emerging today are great young men and women, but unfortunately this is what they're taught, and therefore their conversions are not accepted.
Right, gotcha. Okay, well, cool. Well, Rabbi, it's been a great show. Thank you for your time. I know it was not exactly the coziest thing for you to have to drop some of your luggage to bring your camera along, so hopefully it'll be a good payoff for you. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in. We will. I'm going to try to stay on a every other week schedule for right now. Once we get the studio fully up and running, it'll be back to every week like it was before. So, and anybody who wants to help jump in on that bandwagon to help me get this baby paid for, hey, you know where to find me. TanakTalk.com, PayPal button, whatever. There's also a Patreon account set up too for those who want to do a reoccurring. So, but yeah, it's going to be here in about 4 weeks. I'm pretty excited to be able to get some electricity and stuff in there and move everything out there. Get a happy wife, happy life. She'll have her office back, Baruch Hashem. So I can't wait. It's going to be great. She loves it though, because she gets to sit in here and listen in. I've got it in the room speaker, so oftentimes she'll come in and just sit and watch you talk and listen to all the good information. And so it's always pleasurable. So, well, thank you all. Thank you, Rabbi. Love you much. Thank you all you viewers out there. You guys rock, man. We will talk to you guys later. Shalom, shalom. Shalom, Rabbi.